He's the owner. He owns this place.
I said stay back. Do not interfere with the police investigation.
Officer, I am trying to tell you my business license and the deed to this property are in my briefcase.
I don't care what you have. Stand up. You're under arrest.
5 minutes. That's all you get. The voice was a steel wire cutting through the warm, buttery aroma of freshly baked croissants. It was sharp, laced with an authority that felt alien in a place built on warmth and welcome. Grab your notebook and be on your way. Elijah Vance didn't look up, not at first. His pencil, a well-worn Blackwing, continued its smooth glide across the page of his sketchbook. He was finalizing the designs for the new outdoor patio, a little oasis of green he planned to build for the community to enjoy during the summer months. He carefully shaded the area where a small fountain would go, the sound of trickling water a pleasant thought in his mind. Only when the final graphite stroke was complete did he place the pencil down, close his sketchbook, and slowly lift his gaze. Standing over his small corner table was a police officer. The man's uniform was crisp, the name tag above his right breast pocket reading Holloway. He was young, maybe 27 or 28, with a jaw set so tight it looked like it was carved from stone. His hand was resting almost casually on the grip of his service weapon, a posture meant to convey effortless dominance. "Officer," Elijah said, his voice a calm, measured baritone that had soothed nervous employees and negotiated with tough vendors for a decade. "Is there a problem?" "The problem is you've been sitting here for over an hour sketching the layout of this place and watching the register," Holloway snapped, his eyes darting around the bakery as if to confirm his own suspicions. "The manager wants this table cleared for paying customers. You're loitering." Elijah's eyebrows rose slightly. He gestured with an open palm to the half-empty mug of dark roast coffee and the plate with a few remaining crumbs of the almond bear claw he'd been enjoying. "I am a paying customer, officer, a loyal one at that, and I believe the manager is quite happy to have me here." "I'm the one telling you to leave," Holloway countered, taking a slight step forward, crowding Elijah's space. "We've had a string of daytime robberies in this district. Men casing businesses, pretending to be customers before they come back later. You fit the profile." Elijah paused, letting the officer's words hang in the air between them, thick and sour like spoiled milk. He looked down at his own hands, calloused from years of kneading dough in the early days, now resting on a sketchbook filled with dreams for his business. He glanced at his simple, clean attire, dark jeans, a collared navy blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and worn-in leather boots. He was a baker, an entrepreneur, a pillar of the neighborhood. But in that moment, all the officer saw was a profile. "A profile," Elijah repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Officer Holloway, I can assure you that your assessment is mistaken, profoundly so. If you'll allow me to reach into my back pocket, I can show you my identification, and then perhaps we can have a more productive conversation with the manager." "Hands on the table now," Holloway commanded, his voice dropping an octave. His hand tightened on his weapon, the casual rest becoming a firm, ready grip. The few other patrons in the bakery, a college student typing on a laptop, 2 women sharing a pot of tea, stopped their quiet activities. The gentle hum of the espresso machine suddenly seemed deafening in the heavy silence that descended. "You're making this difficult," Holloway said, a tremor of adrenaline now evident in his voice. He was ready for a fight, perhaps even hoping for one. It was the kind of encounter that could end up as a meritorious note in his file. "On the contrary, officer," Elijah said, his hands flat on the oak table, his gaze unwavering. "I am trying to make this very, very easy for you. I am trying to help you avoid a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your career. I am not a threat. I am not a loiterer. And this is my table in my establishment. I'm not going anywhere." He didn't need to look up to know that the small, dome-shaped security camera above the door was recording every second of this exchange. He had installed it himself. He knew its every angle, its every blind spot. He also knew that Officer Holloway was standing directly in its unblinking, high-definition gaze, completely unaware that the man he was threatening was not just a customer in the Daily Need bakery. He was the owner, founder, and the very soul of the place. Before we witness the career-imploding fallout of this officer's disastrous assumption, take a moment to drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these critical stories to light. And if you believe that a person's hard-earned dream shouldn't be turned into a nightmare by prejudice, hit that like button and subscribe. The story you are about to see is a shocking testament to a problem that is, sadly, all too real. Elijah Vance was not a man who looked for trouble. At 48, he had built a life on the principles of hard work, patience, and meticulous planning. He was an architect by training, a man who had spent 15 years designing sleek, impersonal glass towers for corporate giants. But his heart had never been in the steel and concrete. It had been in the simple, honest alchemy of flour, water, yeast, and heat. He had walked away from a six-figure salary and a corner office to resurrect his grandmother's sourdough starter and her book of handwritten recipes. The Daily Need wasn't just a business to Elijah, it was a legacy. He had poured every dollar of his savings, cashed out his 401k, and taken out a second mortgage on his modest home to bring it to life. He had designed the entire space himself, from the reclaimed wood counters to the warm, pendant lighting that cast a golden glow on the pastry cases. He'd spent the first year sleeping on a cot in the back office, waking up at 2 a.m. every day to mix the dough, his hands caked in flour, his body aching with a fatigue so deep it felt elemental. He didn't buy a franchise or seek out investors. He built his dream from the ground up, one brick, one loaf, one customer at a time. He wanted to create more than just a place to buy bread. He wanted to build a community hub, a place where the coffee was always fresh, the staff was paid a fair wage with full benefits, and the front door was open to everyone. He knew his regulars by name, knew their children's birthdays, and knew their standing orders by heart. He was Mr. Vance, the man who donated leftover bread to the local shelter every night, sponsored the high school's soccer team, and hosted free baking classes for kids on Saturday mornings. To the neighborhood, he was a fixture, as essential and reliable as the sunrise. He had arrived at the bakery at 5 a.m. that day, his usual routine. He'd overseen the morning bake, ensuring the baguettes had the perfect crackle and the croissants were flaky and light. He'd worked the front counter during the morning rush, greeting customers with a genuine smile, his presence a calming, steady force. By early afternoon, the rush had subsided, and he had finally allowed himself a moment of peace at his favorite corner table. It was the only time he had during the week to work on the creative side of the business, planning, dreaming, sketching. To any reasonable person, he was a business owner at work in his own shop. He was a black man in a simple shirt and jeans, his focus on his craft. But Officer Holloway wasn't seeing a reasonable picture. He was looking through a lens warped by suspicion and prejudice. To Holloway, Elijah's focused work didn't register as ownership. It registered as surveillance. The detailed sketches of the building's layout weren't plans for improvement, they were blueprints for a crime. The irony was crushing. Elijah had designed the bakery to be a safe, welcoming space, a sanctuary from the harshness of the outside world. He'd once told a local newspaper that he wanted every person who walked through his doors to feel like they were coming home. Now, in his own home, he was being treated like an intruder. He had built these walls, sanded these floors, and personally installed the very table he was now being ordered to abandon. The officer's accusation wasn't just an error, it was a desecration. It was an attempt to erase his identity, his hard work, and his belonging in the very space that was the culmination of his life's work. Elijah knew this confrontation was no longer just about a misunderstanding over a table. It was about his right to exist, peacefully and successfully, in a world that so often saw his skin color before it saw his humanity. And he would not yield. Officer Nathan Holloway had been with the city's police department for 3 years, but he was new to this precinct. He had requested a transfer from a quieter suburban district, seeking more action, a faster pace, and a chance to make a name for himself. He saw policing not as a service, but as a contest. Every shift was a new game, and every interaction was an opportunity to score points, to assert control, to win. He had grown up in a town where the lines were clearly drawn, and his worldview was a simple, rigid binary. There were good guys, and there were bad guys, and it was his job to sort them out. His new training sergeant, a weary veteran, had given him what he considered sage advice. This district has its problems. Be proactive. Don't wait for trouble to find you. You see something that doesn't feel right? You handle it. Clear out the riffraff before they scare off the taxpayers. Holloway had taken that advice to heart, interpreting it as a license to act on his instincts, to trust his gut. The problem was, his gut was poisoned by a lifetime of unchallenged biases. When he drove his patrol car past the Daily Need, he wasn't looking for community members. He was scanning for threats. He saw a black man sitting alone, intensely focused on a notebook, looking up occasionally to scan the counter and the front door. Holloway's internal calculus, honed by a flawed philosophy and a profound lack of experience in a diverse urban environment, produced an immediate, incorrect answer. He didn't see an architect sketching a patio. He saw a lookout mapping entry and exit points. He didn't see a business owner observing the flow of his shop. He saw a criminal timing the cashier's movements. In Holloway's mind, the equation was simple. This was a nice, upscale bakery. The man didn't fit his preconceived notion of the clientele, let alone the ownership. Therefore, he was an anomaly, and anomalies were threats. He parked his cruiser hastily, not bothering to check if he was blocking a driveway. He adjusted his duty belt, the weight of it a familiar comfort, a confirmation of his power. He watched Elijah for another 30 seconds through the plate glass window, each innocent action. A sip of coffee, a glance at the door when a customer entered, becoming further evidence in the narrative he was building in his head. He was going to be the hero of this story. He was going to stop a crime before it happened. He strode into the bakery with a manufactured swagger, his shoulders squared, his chin high. He was so focused on the perceived threat at the corner table that he failed to notice the details of the environment. He didn't see the plaque on the wall from the Chamber of Commerce awarding Elijah Vance, proprietor, the Small Business of the Year award. He didn't see the photos behind the counter of Elijah with the local youth soccer team, all of them wearing jerseys with "The Daily Need" emblazoned across the chest. He saw only his target. He thought he knew who I was before he ever spoke a word, Elijah would later recount to his sister, an attorney. He wasn't there to investigate, he was there to confirm what he already believed. Once a person like that has decided you're a nail, everything you do looks like a reason to be hammered. Back inside the bakery, the aroma of cinnamon and cardamom was now thick with an unspoken menace. Elijah maintained his seated posture, his body relaxed, but his mind sharp, analytical. He had dealt with men like Holloway before, men whose authority was a fragile shield for their own insecurity. He knew that any sudden movement, any flicker of anger would be interpreted as aggression and used to justify whatever came next. He had to be smarter, calmer. He had to let the officer build his own cage, bar by bar. "I'm not going to tell you again," Holloway said, his voice rising, drawing the full attention of everyone in the shop. "Get up and get out, now." "On what grounds, officer?" Elijah asked, his tone even and inquisitive, as if he were discussing a point of law. He knew the law. He knew that for a trespassing charge to be valid, the owner or an authorized agent of the property had to issue the warning. "Has the manager, Maria, asked you to remove me? Has the owner of this establishment requested my removal?" "I am the law, and I am telling you to leave," Holloway retorted, his face flushing. The man's calm questioning was getting under his skin. It wasn't the reaction he expected. He expected fear, or immediate compliance, or a loud protest. This quiet, intelligent resistance was a challenge to his authority, and he couldn't stand it. You are disrupting the business." At that exact moment, as if on cue, the swinging door from the kitchen opened. Maria Sanchez, the bakery's manager, emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 40s who had been Elijah's first hire. She saw the uniformed officer looming over her boss, and her cheerful expression immediately vanished, replaced by one of alarm. "Officer?" Maria called out, her voice sharp with concern as she moved toward the confrontation. "Is everything all right here?" Holloway spun to face her, holding up a hand like a traffic cop. "Stay behind the counter, ma'am. This is official police business. I'm handling a situation." "A situation?" Maria's brow furrowed in confusion. She looked past the officer to Elijah, who gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "That's Mr. Vance. He's not a situation, he's my boss. He owns this place." "I said stay back," Holloway barked, his voice cracking with agitation. The manager's statement didn't compute. It contradicted the entire narrative he had constructed. Instead of reassessing, he doubled down. "Do not interfere with a police investigation, or you can be charged with obstruction. Is that understood?" "Officer, that's enough," Elijah's voice cut in, sharper now, shedding its patient tone for one of command. "That is my employee, and you will not address her in that manner. Maria, please step back. Do not engage with him. Go to the office and call my sister Eleanor. Her number is on the emergency list." "He's not calling anybody," Holloway snarled, turning his full attention back to Elijah. The fact that this man was giving orders, talking about lawyers, and being defended by the staff was enraging him. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Criminals weren't supposed to be so composed. "I've given you a lawful order. Stand up. Turn around. You're under arrest." "I am trying to tell you," Elijah said, enunciating each word with deliberate clarity for the benefit of the cameras and the growing number of cell phones now pointed in their direction. "My wallet, with my driver's license, my business license, and the deed to this property are in my pocket and my briefcase right here. If you would simply look at them, this entire situation would be over. You are attempting to arrest a man for trespassing in his own bakery." "I don't care about your stories," Holloway said, his hand finally leaving his weapon and reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. "You had your chance to walk away. You chose this." He didn't want the truth. He wanted submission. He had made a public command, and to his immature way of thinking, backing down would be a sign of weakness. His ego had taken the wheel, and it was driving him straight off a cliff. He grabbed Elijah's arm, the sudden aggressive contact sending a shockwave through the room. Elijah didn't resist. He didn't pull away or tense up. As Holloway yanked him from the chair, he rose with a fluid, controlled motion, a man fully in command of his own body, even as his liberty was being stolen. The indignity was a bitter pill, the feeling of being physically overpowered and publicly shamed in the center of the world he had built. But he channeled the surge of anger into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. He would not give this officer the satisfaction of a struggle. "You are making a mistake that will cost this city a great deal of money," Elijah said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of prophecy. "Save it for the judge," Holloway grunted, twisting Elijah's arm behind his back with unnecessary force. The first cuff snapped shut around his wrist. The sound, a series of sharp metallic clicks, echoed through the now silent bakery. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a line being irrevocably crossed. "You're hurting him! He's the owner!" Maria cried out from behind the counter, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. Her phone was held high, its camera lens a small, dark eye capturing the injustice. "I'm telling you, that's the owner!" "One more word from you and you'll be joining him in the car," Holloway threatened over his shoulder, beads of sweat now visible on his brow. He could feel the stares of the other customers. He was the man with the gun and the badge, but in that moment, he felt a flicker of doubt. He was losing control of the narrative. He shoved it down, replacing it with more aggression. He wrenched Elijah's other arm back, securing the second cuff so tightly it bit into the flesh. "I am compliant, officer," Elijah stated clearly, his voice projecting for the recording phones. I am offering no physical resistance. I have repeatedly informed you of my identity as the property owner. You are proceeding with a false arrest without any probable cause. The charges are criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest, Holloway recited, falling back on the unholy trinity of catch-all charges used to retroactively justify a bad arrest. He shoved Elijah toward the front door. Let's go. Elijah walked with his head held high. He didn't look down in shame. He locked eyes with Maria. Call Eleanor, he repeated, his voice firm. Then call Channel 7 News. Tell them you have a video for them. The mention of the news station gave Holloway a moment's pause, but he was in too deep to turn back now. He pushed Elijah through the glass door, the little bell above it chiming a cheerful, mocking farewell. The bright afternoon sunlight was a shock after the dim warmth of the bakery. Pedestrians on the sidewalk stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. All they saw was the familiar, ugly tableau, a black man in handcuffs being forced into a police car. The image fed 1,000 tired stereotypes, a visual lie that confirmed the biases of passers-by. But Elijah knew the truth would have its own visual evidence. The video from Maria's phone, the footage from the student's laptop, and most importantly, the crystal-clear audio-enabled feed from his own security system. Watch your head, Holloway said, his voice dripping with false courtesy as he shoved Elijah's head down and pushed him into the back of the patrol car. The hard plastic of the seat was cold and unforgiving, designed for discomfort. As the heavy door slammed shut, sealing him in the cage, Elijah closed his eyes. A hot, burning anger surged within him, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever sat in this seat without the resources he possessed. For every individual who didn't have a high-powered attorney for a sister. For every young man who would have panicked, who would have struggled, and whose fear would have been met with violence. He opened his eyes and stared through the wire mesh at the back of Holloway's head. The officer looked exhilarated, breathing heavily, like a predator who had just made a kill. He had no idea he had just been caught in a trap of his own making. The 10-minute drive to the 12th precinct was silent, broken only by the crackle of the police radio. Holloway was likely rehearsing his report, weaving a narrative of a belligerent suspect and a justified arrest. Elijah, meanwhile, was cataloging every detail with the precision of an architect designing a skyscraper. The time of the arrest, the officer's failure to read him his Miranda rights, the tightness of the cuffs cutting off his circulation, the fact that Holloway was now texting on his personal phone while driving. He was building his case. The precinct's sally port was a grim cavern of concrete and steel. As the garage door rolled down behind them, the outside world was shut away. Holloway pulled Elijah from the car with the same rough impatience he'd shown all along. They entered the processing area, a chaotic symphony of ringing phones, clacking keyboards, and the low murmur of police business. At the high booking desk sat Sergeant Frank Costello, a man whose 25 years on the force were etched into the lines on his face. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, a cop from an older generation who valued community relationships over arrest statistics. He knew the neighborhood, its saints and its sinners, better than anyone. Holloway marched Elijah to the desk like a hunter presenting his prize. Got one for booking, Sarge. Trespassing, disorderly, and resisting. Found him casing the Daily Need on Elm Street. Got aggressive when I told him to move along. He placed Elijah's sketchbook and wallet on the counter. Sergeant Costello looked up from his paperwork, his gaze flat and tired. He looked at the flushed, proud face of Officer Holloway. Then his eyes drifted to the man in handcuffs. Costello's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed slightly, then widened in disbelief. A slow, creeping pallor washed over his face, draining the color from his cheeks. He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly across the linoleum floor, and stood up. "Holloway," Costello said, his voice dangerously low and even. "Yeah, Sarge," Holloway replied, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. What in God's name are you doing with Elijah Vance in handcuffs? Holloway's smirk vanished. Vance? Who's that? This guy refused to give me his name, just ran his mouth about owning the place. Costello walked slowly around the high desk, his eyes locked on Elijah. He ignored Holloway completely. Elijah, my God, are you all right? Are you hurt? The cuffs are a little tight, Frank, Elijah said calmly, his use of the sergeant's first name a clear indicator of their long-standing acquaintance. And I'm afraid your new officer here has a fundamental misunderstanding of property law. Costello turned to Holloway, and the look on his face was not anger but a profound, weary pity. Son, do you have any idea who this is? This is Elijah Vance. He provides all the coffee and pastries for our annual policeman's ball, free of charge. He sits on the board of the Downtown Business Association. I have breakfast at his bakery with my wife every single Sunday. And yes, you colossal idiot, he owns the damn place. The blood drained from Nathan Holloway's face. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. His mouth hung open, a silent "oh" of horror. He stared at Elijah, but he wasn't seeing a suspect anymore. He was seeing the expensive leather boots, the quiet confidence, the cold, intelligent anger in his eyes. He was seeing the man Sergeant Costello saw. He didn't show me any ID, Holloway stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. I offered, Elijah corrected him, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the squad room. You threatened to arrest me if I reached for it. Every other officer in the room had stopped what they were doing. All eyes were on the unfolding disaster at the booking desk. Costello pulled a key from his belt and thrust it at Holloway. Get these cuffs off him, now! But Sarge, protocol says once they're on, I have to process the arrest, Holloway began, desperately clinging to procedure as his only shield. I said take them off, Costello roared, his voice bouncing off the cinder-block walls. Holloway's hands trembled as he fumbled with the lock. The moment the cuffs sprang open, Elijah calmly rubbed his wrists, where angry red welts were already forming. Mr. Vance, please, come with me to the captain's office, Costello said, his tone pleading, trying to perform damage control. We can clear this whole thing up. I'm sure Officer Holloway just made a rookie mistake. It's not a mistake we can clear up with a chat, Frank, Elijah interrupted, his voice like ice. And I'm not interested in an off-the-record apology. He turned his attention back to the now terrified Holloway. I believe you are about to book me. I insist you proceed. What? Costello and Holloway said in unison. You don't want an arrest on your record, Elijah, the sergeant pleaded. What I want, Elijah said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, is a paper trail. I want Officer Holloway to fill out his arrest report. I want him to sign his name to a statement of probable cause, under penalty of perjury, and explain to the city exactly what crime he thinks I committed. I want a mugshot and a set of fingerprints. Because without that official record, this is just a misunderstanding that gets swept under the rug. With that record, it becomes Exhibit A in a federal civil rights lawsuit. Officer Holloway looked like he was going to be physically ill. The full, catastrophic weight of his actions crashed down upon him. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had arrested a respected community leader, a friend of the precinct, and a man who clearly had the intelligence and the means to hold him accountable. He had walked into a bakery to clear out the riff-raff and had instead set fire to his own career. Process me, Elijah commanded, his gaze fixed on Sergeant Costello. Do it by the book, because I assure you my sister will be doing everything by the book when she files suit against this department, this city, and him. They had no choice. For the next hour, under the stunned gaze of the entire shift, the officers of the 12th Precinct were forced to go through the humiliating process of booking one of their own community partners. They fingerprinted him. They took his mugshot. Elijah stared directly into the camera, his expression not of a criminal, but of a man documenting his own persecution. With every step, every form filled out, the city's legal liability grew. 2 hours later, Elijah Vance was released. As he walked out the front doors of the precinct, he was met with a blinding wall of camera flashes and a sea of microphones. Maria had been ruthlessly efficient. She had sent her cell phone video to every local news outlet, and one of them had already uploaded it. The story was spreading like wildfire. The headline was simple, brutal, and devastatingly effective. Bakery owner arrested for trespassing in his own store. By nightfall, the video was national news. The stark contrast between Elijah's calm, patient demeanor and Holloway's escalating, unwarranted aggression was impossible to misinterpret. It was a perfect, self-contained story of prejudice in action. The public outcry was immediate and immense. The following morning, Elijah stood on the steps of the federal courthouse. He was flanked by his sister, Eleanor Vance, a formidable civil rights attorney, and several local community leaders. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, looking not like a victim, but like a warrior ready for battle. "Yesterday I was treated like a criminal in the place I built with my own 2 hands," Elijah told the assembled press, his voice steady and powerful. "I was arrested because an officer of the law looked at me and saw not a business owner, not a citizen, but a stereotype. He saw my skin color as probable cause. This isn't just my story. This is the story of countless others who do not have the resources to fight back. Today, we begin the fight for them." The lawsuit Eleanor filed that afternoon was a legal masterpiece. It didn't just name Officer Holloway, it named the city, the police department, and cited a pattern of inadequate training, supervision, and a systemic failure to address issues of implicit bias. It alleged violations of Elijah's First, Fourth, and 14th Amendment rights. The Department of Justice announced it was opening a preliminary inquiry into the precinct's practices. The internal affairs investigation was swift and merciless. The bakery's high-definition security footage, complete with audio, systematically dismantled every lie in Holloway's report. He claimed Elijah was argumentative. The video showed him speaking calmly. He claimed he feared for his safety. The video showed Elijah sitting with his hands on the table. The most damning piece of evidence was the crystal-clear audio of Elijah offering to show his identification and business license, and Holloway refusing to even look. It was a textbook case of willful ignorance and a fatal blow to any defense he might have had. Nathan Holloway was suspended without pay. His union representative, after reviewing the video, told him bluntly that his career in law enforcement was over. There was no defending the indefensible. The city, desperate to stop the public relations hemorrhage and facing a lawsuit they had zero chance of winning, offered a swift and quiet settlement. They wanted to make this go away. They offered to expunge Elijah's record, issue a formal apology, and write him a check. "No," Elijah told his sister, "we don't settle quietly. We make them answer for this publicly. We set a precedent." The city, cornered and facing a trial that would air all its dirty laundry, finally agreed to a public settlement. 6 weeks after the arrest, Officer Nathan Holloway was officially terminated from the police force for gross misconduct, dishonesty, and violating the civil rights of a citizen. He was 28 years old, his dream of being a hero in uniform shattered by his own prejudice. He became a cautionary tale, a symbol of a broken policing philosophy. The city settled with Elijah Vance for $1.5 million. But the day the check cleared, Elijah didn't buy a new car or a vacation home. He held a second press conference, this time in front of the Daily Need. The crowd was filled with supporters, customers, and news crews. "This was never about the money," Elijah said, holding up the settlement check. "It was about accountability. And now, it's about the future." He announced the formation of the Vance Foundation for Community Trust, a new nonprofit organization. He handed the entire $1.5 million check to its newly appointed director. "This money," he declared, his voice ringing with purpose, "will be used to fund legal aid for those who are wrongfully accused but can't afford a good lawyer. It will fund de-escalation and implicit bias training programs that are independent of police departments. And it will provide grants to start-up businesses owned by minorities and women to help them build their own dreams, just as I did." He didn't just win a lawsuit. He transformed a moment of profound personal violation into a powerful engine for communal change. He had won not just because he was innocent, but because he had the power, the resources, and the unwavering resolve to see the fight through to the end. And he was determined to give that power to others. The Daily Need is more popular than ever, a pilgrimage site for people who want to support a business that stands for something more than just good pastry. In the 12th precinct, there's a new photo in the briefing room, a mandatory part of every rookie's orientation. It's a still frame from the security video, Holloway towering over a seated Elijah. The caption beneath it is simple and stark. He owned the store. Assumptions can end a career. Ask for the ID. It serves as a permanent, humbling reminder that a badge is not a license to be blind. Elijah still sits at his corner table on Tuesday afternoons, sketching and dreaming. But now, when officers walk by, they don't see a suspect. They see Mr. Vance. And they often come in not to issue orders, but to buy coffee, a small, daily act of mending a broken trust. At its heart, this story is an exploration of how quickly a dream can be threatened by a nightmare of prejudice. Officer Holloway's actions didn't spring from a vacuum. They were the product of a mindset, a culture that can sometimes prioritize dominance over service and suspicion over empathy. His insecurity, his need to win the interaction, and his deeply ingrained bias created a filter through which he could only see Elijah as a threat. He was so invested in the caricature he had created in his mind that he actively rejected the truth when it was offered to him. He wasn't just a bad apple. He was a symptom of a systemic orchard that sometimes fails to prune its dangerous branches. Could this have gone differently? Of course. If Holloway had possessed a shred of humility, he would have simply asked, "Sir, I'm Officer Holloway. We've had some issues in the area. Would you mind telling me what you're working on?" A simple human conversation would have prevented the entire ordeal. For Elijah, the hypothetical is more chilling. What if he had let his anger show? What if he had raised his voice or stood up too quickly? In that moment, Holloway's fear and aggression could have escalated the situation to a physical, even fatal confrontation. His calm, calculated composure was not just a personality trait, it was a survival tactic, one that black men in America are often forced to master. His victory hinged on his ability to remain superhumanly patient in the face of dehumanizing treatment. The lesson here is profound and multifaceted. For those in authority, it is a stark reminder that power without wisdom is merely tyranny. It teaches that curiosity is a greater tool for a police officer than suspicion, and that true strength lies in the ability to admit a mistake, not in the refusal to back down. For all of us, it underscores the corrosive nature of prejudice. It reminds us that our assumptions about others are often a reflection of our own limitations, not their reality. Accountability should never be dependent on the victim's bank account or their connections. Justice should be the standard, not the exception won by the powerful. Elijah's story is a triumph, but it forces us to ask the most important question. What happens to all the people who are just like Elijah, but who don't own the store? What would you have done if you were in Elijah's shoes? Would you have accepted a quiet apology and settlement? Or would you have demanded a public reckoning as he did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, please consider liking and sharing it to help us continue to raise awareness for these important issues.